Racial discrimination in air travel wasn't just anecdotal. It was a systematic reality playing out daily across terminals worldwide, often unnoticed by those who never experience it. This was about to become the most expensive lesson in discrimination that Skyward Airlines had ever received. In a world where the color of your skin still determines how you're treated, nowhere is this more evident than in the confined spaces of modern air travel, where prejudice finds no escape route, and justice has a long memory. "Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass again," the flight attendant said with a dismissive tone, her eyes narrowed as she examined the ticket. "Your boarding pass has to be confirmed first before you're allowed to board, so you can't board this plane yet. Step aside for others to board." Alexandra, the black CEO of a global tech empire, extended her boarding pass again, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "There's no mistake. I'm in seat 2A. Soon a security guard approached, his hand immediately gripping Alexandra's arm when she tried to explain her situation. His fingers dug into her simple suit jacket as he began pulling her away from the gate. Other passengers looked on, some concerned, some indifferent, some even nodding in approval. But within 30 seconds something extraordinary happened. The massive departure screens throughout the terminal flickered, then went completely black. The boarding gate's electronic displays froze. Announcements over the PA system abruptly cut off mid-sentence. The confusion in the terminal amplified tenfold. Passengers who had been boarding suddenly stopped in their tracks. Airline staff stared at their dead computer terminals in disbelief. Gate 42C was in complete chaos. Passengers shouting over each other, carry-on luggage scattered across the waiting area, airline staff frantically trying to maintain order but failing miserably. This wasn't just your typical flight delay frustration. Something much bigger was unfolding. Alexandra Chen's journey to becoming one of America's most influential tech CEOs defied all odds. Unlike many tech executives with privileged backgrounds and elite connections, Alexandra came from absolutely nothing. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads in a neighborhood where success stories were few and far between. At 16, Alexandra was already showing remarkable talent with computers. While other teenagers were hanging out at the mall, she was fixing broken electronics from pawn shops and teaching herself to code on a second-hand computer her high school teacher had salvaged for her. This wasn't just a hobby. This was survival. By 17, she was making enough money repairing computers for local businesses to help her mother pay rent, but the road was never easy. When she applied to college, despite perfect SAT scores, she was waitlisted at every top tech school. When she finally did get into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, she had to work 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. After college, the pattern continued. At her first tech job, she watched as her white male colleagues with less experience were promoted above her. When she created an innovative scheduling algorithm that saved the company millions, her manager took credit for it. When she spoke up, she was labeled difficult and not a team player. But Alexandra doesn't break. She builds. Instead of fighting a system designed against her success, she created her own system. At 28, she mortgaged everything she owned to start Quantum Dynamics. The company's first office? Her studio apartment. Her first employees? 3 fellow graduates who believed in her vision enough to work for equity when she couldn't afford salaries. 15 years later, Quantum Dynamics employed over 5,000 people globally and reported profits of $1,200,000,000. Alexandra Chen wasn't just successful, she was a force of nature who transformed an industry. The morning of our story, Alexandra was preparing for what might be the most important deal of her career. In her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, she packed lightly for her trip to Singapore. The Global Tech Innovation Summit wasn't just another conference. It was where Alexandra would deliver the keynote address that would secure a $500 million 0-cents investment from the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. Unlike many executives who travel with an entourage, Alexandra preferred traveling alone on long international flights. It gave her time to think, to prepare, to strategize. For the 20-hour journey ahead, she dressed simply, comfortably, but professionally. Black trousers, a silk blouse, and a tailored blazer she could remove during the flight. Her only luxury was a pair of handcrafted leather loafers. What Alexandra didn't know as she headed to the airport that morning was that her path would cross with Victor Hamilton, CEO of Skyward Airlines, a man whose leadership was driving his company straight into the ground. Skyward Airlines was once the pride of American aviation. Founded in the golden age of air travel, it had built its reputation on luxury service and exclusive experiences. Their slogan, "The Sky's Elite," had once represented aspiration. Now, under Victor Hamilton's leadership, it had become something else entirely. At 68, Victor Hamilton was a third-generation airline executive. His grandfather had founded Skyward, his father had expanded it, and Victor had inherited the CEO position almost as a birthright. With silver hair, always perfectly coiffed, and bespoke suits from London tailors, Victor looked the part of the distinguished executive. But appearances can be deceiving. Alexandra's day of frustration began the moment she stepped through the revolving doors of LaGuardia's Terminal B. Having flown first class hundreds of times before, she approached the premium check-in area, a separate section with plush carpet, minimal lines, and staff trained to cater to Skyward's highest-paying customers. But before she could even reach the counter, a gate agent intercepted her. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am," the agent said with a dismissive gesture toward the long, snaking line where dozens of passengers waited. Alexandra paused, took a controlled breath, and politely responded, "I'm flying first class to Singapore." She held up her digital boarding pass on her phone as evidence. The agent barely glanced at it. "Economy check-in is that way," she repeated, this time with visible impatience. It was the first little cut of the day. A small moment that most white travelers would never experience. For Alexandra, she didn't argue. Instead, she walked to the premium counter anyway, and was greeted by a different agent who processed her check-in without issue, though not without first double-checking her booking with visible surprise. After checking her larger suitcase, Alexandra headed to security with just her designer carry-on and briefcase. The premium security lane was nearly empty, a perk of first-class travel that usually made the exorbitant ticket prices worth every penny. But as Alexandra approached the TSA checkpoint, an agent waved her out of the premium lane. "Random security check, ma'am. You'll need to go through enhanced screening." Alexandra watched as three white businessmen in expensive suits walked through the premium lane without a second glance from the same TSA agent. She looked around at the randomly selected travelers in the enhanced screening line. Every single one was a person of color. When her turn came, the male TSA agent's pat-down went well beyond standard procedure. His hands lingered too long. He checked the same areas multiple times. His touch was firmer than necessary. This humiliation burned inside her, but Alexandra maintained her composure. She'd learned long ago that showing anger would only make things worse. She'd be labeled as the angry black woman, giving them justification for their treatment. As she collected her belongings after the screening, she immediately noticed something was missing: her watch. Not just any watch, but a custom-designed Patek Philippe worth over $60,000, 0 cents. It had been a gift to herself when Quantum Dynamics went public. More than its monetary value, it symbolized everything she had overcome. "Excuse me," she said to the TSA agent, "my watch is missing." The agent barely looked up. If it was there, it would have come through. "It was there. I placed it in the bin myself." What followed was 15 minutes of Alexandra insisting on reviewing security footage, while agents suggested she must have forgotten her watch at home. Finally, after she refused to move and threatened to call her attorney, a supervisor miraculously found the watch in a separate bin, one that Alexandra had never used. By the time she reached Gate 42C, boarding for her flight to Singapore had already begun. Despite the delays at security, she still had plenty of time. First-class passengers are typically boarded first, or given the option to board at their convenience. As she approached the first-class boarding lane, a gate agent named Heather, her name tag clearly visible, looked at Alexandra with immediate suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am, this lane is for our first-class passengers only." Alexandra held up her boarding pass once again. "Yes, I'm aware. I'm in seat 2A. Heather took the boarding pass and scrutinized it as though it were written in a foreign language. She frowned, then looked up at Alexandra with obvious disbelief. "A moment, please." She picked up a phone and spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing up at Alexandra with narrowed eyes. By now, several passengers had begun to notice the interaction. A supervisor approached. A man in his late 50s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. His name tag read, Thomas Wilson, Customer Service Supervisor. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Heather rather than to Alexandra. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Heather replied, emphasizing the word "says" as though Alexandra's claim was dubious at best. Thomas took the boarding pass and eyed Alexandra from head to toe, taking in her comfortable but clearly expensive travel attire. "Ma'am, are you aware that first-class tickets on international flights are very expensive?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. A few nearby passengers snickered. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Alexandra's expression didn't change. "We'll need to verify your ticket. There seems to be some kind of irregularity." He stressed the last word as though he'd caught her in the act of fraud. "What irregularity?" Alexandra asked. "I'll need to see additional documentation, passport, credit card used for purchase, and company authorization for the expenditure." This was not standard procedure. This was not required of other passengers. This was harassment disguised as security protocol. By now, several passengers had their phones out, recording the interaction. One older white woman muttered audibly, "Just show your papers if you have nothing to hide." Alexandra provided her passport and corporate credit card, though she rightfully refused to show any company authorization, a document that isn't required by any airline for any passenger, regardless of ticket class. "You'll need to step aside while we verify this information," Thomas insisted. "The flight needs to continue boarding." And so, as other first-class passengers boarded with nothing more than a cursory glance at their boarding passes, Alexandra was escorted to a customer service desk away from the gate. She was told the verification would just take a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched into 20, then 40, then over an hour. Alexandra sat at the desk, watching the minutes tick by on her reclaimed watch. No updates were provided. No explanations were offered. She repeatedly asked about the status of her verification, only to be told, "We're working on it." From where she sat, she could see her gate. She could see the final boarding calls being made. She could see the door to the jet bridge slowly closing. But what she could also see and hear was a group of Skyward employees huddled at a nearby counter, occasionally glancing her way and laughing. Though they tried to keep their voices down in the busy but acoustically unforgiving airport terminal, fragments of their conversation reached her. "Think she belongs in first class. Probably her first time on a plane. Bet she won't be so bold when she misses her flight." Each word was a dagger, but what cut deeper was watching her flight, a flight she had every right to be on, in a seat she had paid thousands for, depart without her. The boarding door closed, the jet bridge pulled back. Through the large windows she watched her plane taxi away. Only then did Thomas return to the desk. "I regret to inform you that while we were verifying your information, your flight has departed," he said without a hint of actual regret. "Unfortunately, you missed your boarding time." Alexandra's voice remained steady despite the rage and hurt building inside her. "I missed my boarding time because your staff deliberately detained me on false pretenses." Thomas ignored her accusation completely. "We can rebook you on the next flight to Singapore, which departs in approximately 5 hours. However, I'm afraid the first class is fully booked. We can offer you an economy seat." This was the final insult. Not just denying her the seat she had paid for, but downgrading her while pocketing the substantial difference in fare. "Show me the booking system," Alexandra demanded. "I want to see the first-class manifest for that flight." "Ma'am, I'm not authorized to— Show me the system, Alexandra repeated, standing now, or I'll have my company's legal team check every record for that flight. Her calm confidence must have rattled him because, to her slight surprise, Thomas turned the monitor toward her. Whether he thought she wouldn't understand what she was looking at, or whether he simply panicked, we'll never know. But what Alexandra saw confirmed her suspicions. There were 3 open seats in first class on the next flight. "You're lying to me," she said simply. "There are 3 available first-class seats." Thomas quickly turned the monitor away. "Those are blocked for operational reasons." "What operational reasons?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss." "Discriminatory reasons," Alexandra said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "You prevented me from boarding my original flight, and now you're lying about availability to keep me out of first class on the next one." Several other travelers had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. Some had their phones out, sensing that something significant was happening. "I demand to be rebooked in first class on the next flight as compensation for missing my original flight due to your staff's actions," Alexandra stated firmly. Thomas's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." "I will not be silenced when I'm being discriminated against," Alexandra replied, her voice perfectly controlled but carrying enough to be heard clearly by those around her. That's when Thomas made the call that would ultimately destroy his company. He signaled to security. 2 guards approached rapidly, and the taller one immediately grabbed Alexandra's arm with unnecessary force. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now," he said gruffly. "Take your hands off me," Alexandra said. "I have done nothing wrong." The guard tightened his grip, yanking her away from the counter. The sudden movement caused Alexandra to lose her balance, and her phone and documents scattered across the floor. As she bent to retrieve them, she noticed a familiar figure watching the scene from a short distance away. Even without the media photos she'd seen, she would have recognized Victor Hamilton by his air of entitlement alone. The Skyward CEO was observing the situation with what could only be described as satisfaction. As the security guards continued to usher her away, she heard Victor turn to a colleague and mutter words that would soon come back to haunt him. Some people just don't know their place. It was at that precise moment, as she was being forcibly escorted through the terminal while other passengers stared, that Alexandra Chen made a decision that would change the airline industry forever.